Hello and welcome to the SDS2 2015 Components webinar. My name is Ryan Vanek and I will be your presenter today. The first thing that we are going to cover is what is a component. Well, components are parametrics that can be modified through an edit window or changes that are made to a member that is attached to. So you can think of it as, let's say I have a component that is a beam stiffener, and I have that to a W12 beam. If I change that to a W14 beam, that component will automatically update. I can also go in there and edit that component as one entity, and I can make changes to it. Maybe I want half-depth stiffeners. Components are capable of adding material, bolts, holes, welds, and other operations available through parametrics. So basically anything that's available through parametrics I can do as a component. But unlike parametrics, components can be edited, copied, and moved as one entity and not separate items. So it's all grouped into one component that then can be edited. With a parametric, we would have to delete that parametric and then re-add it. With a component, I can actually edit that. Okay, so what we're going to cover today under components is adding components, selecting and editing, move and copy, deleting, graphical, explode, and selection tools. So let's get right into adding components. Components can be added from the pull-down menu under Model and then Component, and then you have Add and you have some other features there, or using the component icon that you can see on my screen. Just like other tools in SDS2, if a member is selected, only the components associated with that member type will show in the list. So if I have a pre-selection, my member type will only show the different member types that that component can be added to. Some of the components that are delivered with SDS2, beam stiffeners in the beam and column, HSS cap plate, outriggers, safety cables, safety tabs column. Now you see two safety tabs there. I'll explain that when we start adding them in the actual model. Some that are in development: reduced beam section, or some people like to call that a dog bone, base plate shear key, and nailer holes. Okay, so let's go into SDS2 and let's take a look at these components, adding these components and modeling. So here I have open an isometric view. I'm going to go ahead and open up a view that will bring me in a little bit further here. So the first component that I'm going to add is a beam stiffener. We talked about having a beam stiffener. Let's go ahead and add one. So I could go through my model pull-down window, component, add, or from my icon right here, I have component add. I'm going to go ahead and click that. So here I have some different components that I have installed. I'm going to go with beam stiffener beam, and I'm going to select this beam. Now here's that edit window. Similar to a parametric, I'd get an edit window up, and I have some different options here. I have graphical, lock stiffener spacing values. We'll cover that here in a little bit. Location method, I have fixed spacing, pick points, and even spacing. I do have some options for fixed and even spacing down below right here. Fixed even options, minimum distance from the left end of the stiffener, minimum distance from the right end of the stiffener, and spacing. If I go to even spacing, I will have number of spaces and the start point, either work point dimension or minus dimension. Very similar to what the parametric does. Now if I pick points, I'm not going to define that here, but I would be able to go in there and pick the points that I want to have the stiffeners at. I'm going to go with even spacing. Pick points, member X offset distance from the point that I pick. How far in the X direction do I want those offsets? Single or double stiffeners, we're just going to go with single. Beam side, we can go both near side or far side. And orientation, normal, vertical, and rotate. We'll take a look at those here in a little bit when we put it on a sloping member. Then we have an X distance here. That's going to get filled out once it puts the stiffeners in there, and we'll modify that when we get that chance once the stiffeners are in there. We talked about the fixed and even options. Then we have some double stiffener options if we did select double stiffeners, where we want that to reference from, and the dimension from work point to stiffener center line. Then we come down to the stiffener dimensions, plate thickness, width. We have an auto width. Right now that is checked, so we cannot adjust the plate width. What that's going to do is that's going to take information from the member size that we're adding this to and give me that width. Stiffener depth options, we have full depth, top flange half depth, bottom flange half depth. We're going to go with top flange half depth. Then we have the user stiffener depth. If I would click this, I could go down here and say top flange user depth and give it my own depth, but we're just going to go half depth. End preparation, do we want a clip on that, a cope, or fit exact? We're just going to go with a clip. And we have a clip length, clip depth, top clearance, bottom clearance. We don't have bottom clearance because we have half depth. Stiffener options, material finish, material grade, material color, and then we have our welding information. Do we want to add weld to that stiffener? What type of weld, what size? So we're going to go ahead and say OK here. Now, once I have added a component, I do need to process. So the member went back to stick because it's representing that it needs to be processed. So I'm going to go ahead and process. And once I get my picture back, I should have my stiffeners in there. Okay, so that's a stiffener. We'll come back and we'll look at that one in a little bit, but let's go ahead and add another one. This time we're going to add column safety holes. So we're going to go to our component add, and we are going to add column safety holes. We're going to say OK. Now, this component is added to a beam. The reason we have added this, or we are going to add this to a beam, is because generally the beam is going to affect the height of those holes. There is the option for tabs to put it directly on the column and then give it information to tell it which height, but we're just going to go with adding it to a beam. We're going to select this member to add it to. And we have our options up here. Locate, add safety cable holes, add lifeline hole. We could do either one or both. Member end, left or right end. I cannot put it on both ends. If I wanted it on the other end, I would have to add another component on that end. And then I have column face. Face A, face B, or face C. If I do it on the face A, do I want near side gauge line, far side gauge line, or both gauge lines? Hole diameter, column flange gauge, either setup, material file, or user. Right now I'm taking that from setup, and it's giving me a 5.5 gauge column flange. Column web gauge, so if I'm going into the web, I have that set to 4. Then I have floor thickness, distance from floor to first safety cable hole, and then between the cable holes, and then to the lifeline hole. So we're going to go ahead and say OK here. Turned it to stick. I need to process. And there I have my holes. Now, I see that they're in the wrong face. I want those in the web. So we'll go back and we'll look at that here in a second. First, we're going to look at selecting a component. Now, selecting a component, there are multiple ways of doing this. If I come in here and I just go and select this, you'll notice that both of the stiffeners, or all 4 of the stiffeners highlighted. When I select a component, it will highlight, and it'll highlight any material that's associated with that component. Now, if I hover over an area, I can right-click and I can say Select Other. I can go to Beam Stiffener, Beam Component, and that will highlight. Now, this is only if I have the default set, the all set, or if I go to my custom components. If I go to legacy default, that will react like SDS2 in the past, and that is no longer it's no longer editing or selecting the component, it's selecting just that piece of material. So by default, it's going to filter and allow me to select components. I can also select a component through my model tree. So up here I have beam B14 selected. If I go here and break down this model tree, B14, I will see that I have my beam stiffener component listed in my model tree. I also see that I have my safety cable holes listed. Now, safety cable holes are a little bit differently. Only components that have material associated with them can be edited or can be selected in the model without using the model tree. So what that means is if I go here, I can select this plate. Okay, if I go up to these holes here, I can't select the hole and it'd be part of the component. If I zoom in here, all it's going to do is select the hole. That one hole is selected. In order to select the cable safety holes, I have to go over to my model tree and select it that way. Now, once I have those selected, I can edit them. Now, going back to the beam stiffener, it's as simple as any other edit in SDS2. If I double-click on the beam stiffener, it brings up my edit window for the beam stiffener. If I go over to my model tree and I double-click on the safety holes, it'll bring up my edit window for the safety holes. I can also do my traditional right-click and edit. That will bring that up as well. Also on the stiffener one, I can right-click and edit that as well. Now, these components are stored with the member, so if I edit this beam, I will notice that if I bring over my member edit tree, I do have those components listed in my member edit tree. I can see beam stiffener here and safety cable holes. Those will always go to the bottom of the list. If I double click on that, highlight it and then unhighlight it, it will bring that up to the top. There we go, it's over here, beam stiffeners. And there's that information. If I want to come in here and change this to a full depth stiffener, I'll say OK, reprocess this, and now I have a full depth stiffener. So I didn't have to delete that, re-add it, I could just edit that. Now, for the cable safety holes, we did have that in the wrong position, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to my cable safety hole and I'm going to go to face B. I'm going to say OK, reprocess that, and now they should have moved to face B. There we go. Now if I look at that beam stiffener, I'm going to go ahead and edit that one again. I'll just double click on it. Now I said that it would fill out information in this X distance of where the stiffeners are. So in the X distance from the left end of this member, I have a stiffener at 8'4" and 16'8". Well, let's change this up a little bit and let's go to, I went to even spacing, let's go to fixed spacing and let's say OK. This should give us a few more stiffeners. There we go. Now let's say that I wanted to just move this one stiffener over. I want to move that over. Maybe I have a connection coming in there or a cutout in that beam. I'm going to move that over to 4'8". So there, I've moved that. I'm going to go ahead and say OK and reprocess. And did it move? It sure doesn't look like it. If I go in here and edit this, it says 4'2". Now if I make any changes in this stiffener distance, I need to lock the stiffener spacing values. So if I don't want them to change, I have to lock those values. Once you do lock those positions are going to be locked in place. So if I lock that, I say OK, we should see that stiffener move. And now it's 4'8" from the left end. I'm going to go ahead and unlock those, and if I come in here and I right click, I can copy a row, I can paste, cut row, copy row, append row, get a new row on the bottom, I can delete a row, and unmix a row. So once I do that though, I do need to lock that stiffener spacing or else it will recalculate it every time. So I'm going to lock it at that 4'8". Okay. So now once we have our components the way we want them, we can also copy and move them. So I'm going to go ahead and open up back up my ISO so I can see a bunch of different members that I can copy and move these components to. So the stiffener one, I'm just going to go ahead and select it. If I go up to my model pull down window, components, copy, I can copy that component, and maybe I want to copy it right there. Now it will keep me in this command. I can pick multiple pieces to copy it to. Once I'm done, I can right click and say OK, I will have to process, and now I should have that component in each one of these. Now if I edit this component right here, since I did lock those values, it's at 4'8". It didn't recalculate. It's a different size beam, but it did not recalculate those because I have those locked. If I want to come in here and unlock those right now, I can reprocess, and I should get a different spacing. If I edit that again, now it's 5'5". I can also move them, as I said before, so I'm going to select this one right here, and I'm going to go through my right-click menu because I have all of those options for component, copy, and move. I'm going to go ahead and move this component, and it'll ask me to select a member to move it to. I'm going to go over here to this sloping beam, and I'm going to move it to that sloping beam, and I'm going to go ahead and reprocess. Now, back when we first initially input this, we told it that we wanted those stiffeners to be vertical. So they are vertical right now. If I edit this component and I change that back to normal, or change it to normal, and reprocess, now they're going to follow the slope of that beam. Now, normal on a completely flat beam is going to be vertical as well. So if I would go ahead and copy this one, let's just right-click and copy, and let's copy it to right there. We'll go ahead and right-click and say OK, reprocess that. This is set to normal, but it did keep it vertical because that's a flat beam. Now if I want to move or copy my column safety holes, I'm going to have some issues here because I can't actually select it. Well, yes I can. Through my model tree I can select safety holes, and just the same as the other one, I can right click and I can copy component. Maybe I want to copy it to this beam and this beam. We're going to go ahead and say OK, reprocess, and we should see our cable safety holes in that beam and in that beam. Now we can edit it and change that so it's not going through the web, and change it to go through the flanges. We'll go ahead and edit that beam, and we'll go down to our cable safety holes, and this time we're going to select face A and face C. Reprocess, and now we see our holes are going through both face A and face C. I could pick all three faces and have it go through the web and both flanges, but in this case I just want it to go through both flanges. Now, when I'm dealing with beams that have components on them, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this one back. Go ahead and grab that component, right click, copy component to this beam, and reprocess it. Now I'm going to go and surface on the top of this beam, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this beam. Copy member, single copy, and we'll just go here, we'll just go up 5 feet. Now I get an alert right away. There are no columns attached to this beam. What that is telling me is that I have those components on the beam that I copied, and it's going to copy those components with it. There is no column for the cable safety hole component, so it's just giving me a warning telling me that there is no column there. It's still going to have that component attached to it, but it's not going to put any holes because there is no column there. So we'll go ahead and say OK. We'll go ahead and reprocess this, and we see those stiffeners in there. So it does copy the components with those members. Now, the same is true if I add a new member. So the last member that I edited, like SDS2 always remembers the last member that I edited, if I come in here and add a beam, and let's add a construction line first. So let's go ahead and add a beam from this point over to this side, and W18 by 35, you will notice right away when I start adding this that I do have my cable safety hole component in here. We're going to go ahead and say OK. Should give me a member that has the cable safety hole. Now, it did not have the stiffener because the last one that I edited did not have that stiffener component on there. It was before I took B14, before I re-added that component on there. So let's go ahead and edit this one real quick. We'll say OK. And we'll add one more beam for good measures from there to there. And here we will see the beam stiffener and the safety cable hole. Reprocess that. And there's the stiffeners. Now, these also have the column safety holes on them. Maybe we don't want that stiffener on there. We can delete components. Maybe I don't even want the stiffener. Now, the stiffener one's easy. I can come in here, I can select it, hit the delete key on my keyboard, and now that component is gone. The cable safety hole, there's nothing there for me to grab, so I do need to edit this. And if I come in here, I see my cable safety hole component. Over here in my member edit tree, I can right-click, and I can say delete. Now that component is gone. Once I've deleted a component, there's no undoing, just like other portions of SDS2, that I can't get that back, but now that column safety hole is gone. If I do use the model tree, I can select this member right here, and that is B97. We'll scroll down our list to B97. I have my safety holes here. I can right-click, select it, hit the delete key on my keyboard, and it will delete that component that way as well. So I can use my model tree, the member edit screen, or if there's a material attached, I can use the selection in the model and the delete key. So that's deleting components. Now, the next thing we're going to cover is graphical components. Just like anything else in SDS2 that pertains to the member, if I do a manual edit on something, it is going to change it to be graphical. So if I come in here and look at this stiffener, maybe I want a 1-inch stiffener on this one stiffener. If I come up here and go back to I'll go back to my legacy default where I can just edit this piece of material. If I did keep it on default, I can right-click, edit other, and I can edit that material. And let's change this one to 1 inch. Say OK, telling me it's going to change it. Now it's changed to 1 inch. Now if I edit this component, it's still part of the component. If I edit this component, we'll notice that it is marked for graphical. Now I am in control of this component. Once it's marked graphical, I am in control. If I come in here and if I change this to say a W21, change it to a 21 by 44, and I reprocess, the stiffener size does not change. You'll notice that my stiffeners are coming up a little bit short. Now, just like connections, if I want to take those off graphical, if I edit this component, I can uncheck the graphical, say OK. We'll go ahead and reprocess. Now it's back to a system component, and it has the correct depth for that stiffener. Now if I did want to change that again, I could right-click, edit this, and change it to a 1-inch stiffener. So any change that I make is going to turn that graphical if I'm doing it outside of the component edit screen. Now let's say that I don't want it to be a component at all. Maybe I want those to all be individual pieces. We do have an explode option. If I go to my model component, I have explode. If I select this component, I can right-click and say explode component. Now be very careful with this. Once I explode a component, there is no way to get that back to be a component. You would have to delete that material and re-add the component. So I'm going to go ahead and say explode component. And if I come in here, now these are all individual pieces of material that are not associated with the component. If I edit this member, I no longer see my stiffener component in my member edit tree. I can edit these pieces of material just like any other piece of material. Like I said, if I want to get that back to be a component, I would have to delete this material, the welds, and then re-add that component back in there. So I can explode those components. Now we do have a selection tool for selecting all of a certain type of component. If I go here on my toolbar, I have selection tool. It is also through the model pull-down window component selection tool. What this allows me to do is pick any available component. Now this list that I'm showing here on my screen does not mean that these components are added to the model at this point. They're just a list of available components that I have in my data directory. So I can go in here and I can select any one of these. We have a lot of beam stiffener beams, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. We can either select the member that's attached, that the component is attached to, or the actual component itself. And if we wanted to, we could say edit selection results, and it will bring up an edit screen. We're not going to edit yet. We're just going to go ahead and let it select it. We'll say OK. And you'll notice that all of the members that have that component attached to it are now, or all the components are highlighted. If I would have selected member, the members would have been highlighted. So we're going to try that one more time, and this time we're going to edit them. So we're going to say component, we're going to say edit selection results. I had it set to the wrong component. Beam stiffener beam. And now it should bring up an edit screen. My orientation is different. I get the gray box that I always do in SDS2. Maybe I want them all to be top flange user depth, and we'll go with a depth of 5. We'll say OK. We'll go ahead and reprocess. And now they're all that user depth. Now I didn't have to use that edit screen if I wanted to come in here. Let's go ahead and unselect them first. Beam stiffener beam. We'll select the component, say OK. Now if I right click and edit, I can edit them that way as well. We'll go back and make them full depth stiffeners. There we go. Now some of the other components that we have, I'll demonstrate adding some of those other components. So we'll go to our component add. We have beam stiffener beam. That's what we've used a lot. We also have beam stiffener at a column. So if I select that and I come over here, now this time I'm going to, before I added it to a beam, this time I'm going to add it to a column. I'm going to add it to a column because if I move that column, I want those stiffeners to move with it. So it's going to be associated with the column. So I'm going to select this column here. And I have information, member end, bottom or top, single or double stiffeners. Let's go with double stiffeners. Beam side both, orientation. So I have a lot of different options, similar to the parametric that's already out there. I'll go ahead and say OK and reprocess. And now I should have those double stiffeners there. So it's a quick way to get those stiffeners. Now if I do move that column, it is going to move those stiffeners with it because it is associated with the column. So if I go back to my component add, we also have an HSS cap plate component. Now there is no beam column or anything listed with this. That's because it will take any beam, column, vertical brace, anything that has an HSS, excluding miscellaneous, and put a cap plate on it if it's an HSS member type, material type. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to the top of this column that we were just looking at. And for those options, if I want it to be a round plate, I could just select round plate. Which end? Both ends. Let's just go with the right end of that. Material finish, material grade, cap thickness. Now we do have some break options, which I'm going to show you here in a second, and some different options for clipping. We'll go ahead and say OK and process this. And we now see that cap plate is on there. Now if we go to a brace that we have here, we'll add that same component. I have something pre-selected, so I'm going to unpre-select it there. So we're going to go HSS cap plate. We're going to select this brace, and we're going to go with both ends. And we have some notching options. If we want to break plate at notch, we're going to go ahead and say yes. So we'll say OK, and we'll see what that does. And there, now I have two separate plates. They're all part of that one component. I can double-click edit it. Now I can select that component, copy component. We'll copy it over to here. Reprocess. Now we have those plates capped off, those tubes capped off. We also have a Outrigger component. Let's go ahead and add that one. And let's add it to this beam right here. So we have some different options for our Outrigger placement method: auto spacing, pick points, fixed spacing, beam side, far side or near side. We're going to go at near side, so it's coming out towards us. Orientation, normal, vertical, length from the face or the center, the spacing of those. Material type, we have plate, or we can do a rolled section. We're just going to go ahead and leave it at plate. We can, once we select rolled section, if we do, it will give us some rolled section options, and we can define what rolled section we want. We're just going to do it in plate. Horizontal length, we have a bunch of different information: material finish, material color, the plate options for the plate thickness, depth options, coping and clipping of that plate, adding pinholes, yes or no, hole information. Let's go ahead and say yes to adding a pinhole, and then bolt information for that and any weld information. We'll just go ahead and say OK. We'll take a look, see what it gives us. And there we have our Outrigger component added. Did give us a cope there, like we had said. Clipped it at the bottom. Now I said that we could do safety holes or safety tabs. Let's go to another column and give it some safety tabs. Let's go component add, and we'll go safety tabs. We'll pick this beam right here. And member end, left or right end. I think we want to go to the right end. We'll add a lifeline tab and safety cable tabs to face A. Gives us similar options to the holes. We'll go ahead and say OK, and we'll take a look at it. Nice thing is you can really play around with these and see what you need. Now this does give me a piece of material that I can actually select and edit. I did not want it on face A. Let's go ahead and go with face B. There I have it in the web. My position in the flange and web, I can also offset the flange face, positive or minus. Very similar options to what the parametric has. Now I can also do the tabs using the column option. If I come in here and I say component add safety tabs column, this time I might actually pick the column, and I have those same options. Let's go to face D this time. Position, we'll just go with the toe. And now my distance, thickness of floor, and distance from floor to first cable safety hole is going to come from the bottom of the column. It's not looking at the beam, so if I want a greater distance, I want to come in here and I want to say 6'0", say. We'll go ahead and say OK and reprocess. And we'll find those tabs. On the reverse web there. A little off there coming out to the flange. I think that's what we told it to do with the toe. Let's try a different option here. Reprocess that. There we go. Now we're going to the outside of the flange. There are some issues there because the holes going into the actual column. That's all just because that's what I set up. It's not reading any information in there. I would have to reset that, but it's as easy as an edit and adjusting those. Okay, so what we covered adding components. We looked at all the different components that are available to you right now, selecting and editing those components, move and copy, deleting, changing them to graphical, exploding a component, and using the selection tool to select all of the same type components in my model. So that concludes our webinar. Thank you for attending.